My business partner thought I was too busy to notice. They were all wrong about the same man. My name is Benjamin Sutton. I'm 46 years old. I own a real estate development company in Charlotte, North Carolina. Started it from nothing 16 years ago. Built it into something that employs 43 people and puts roofs over families' heads across 3 counties. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you so you understand what I sacrificed. Evenings, weekends, vacations that never happened. I kept the lights on, literally and figuratively. Daphne and I met in our mid-20s. Married at 28, had Cole a year later. Then Gavin when Cole was 8. For a long time, we were good. Maybe not perfect, but real. She had energy and ambition, and a way of walking into a room that made people pay attention. I loved that about her. I encouraged it. 3 years ago, she started talking about running for city council. I supported that too. Fundraisers, dinners, weekends, giving speeches at community centers. I wrote checks. I showed up in suits and smiled for photos. I told everyone who'd listen that my wife was going to do great things for Charlotte. I believed it. What I didn't see, what I was too busy keeping the business alive to notice, was that somewhere along the way, she'd started doing great things for herself first. I hired Carol Dennett weeks before that Tuesday night. Carol was former law enforcement, ran her own firm out of modest office on Providence Road, and had the kind of eyes that didn't miss much. A colleague of mine had used her during a nasty business dispute. She wasn't cheap. She was worth every dollar. It was Carol who first told me about Todd Fielding. I sat with that name for 2 days before I could even say it out loud. Todd Fielding, my business partner of 3 years. The man I brought into a joint venture on a mixed-use development in Noda. The man who'd sat at my kitchen table, eaten Daphne's pot roast, clapped me on the shoulder, and told me I was one of the good ones. Carol laid it out clean. Surveillance photos, timestamps, a restaurant on South Boulevard that Daphne had once called too pretentious for words, a hotel parking garage in Dilworth, receipts that matched dates when Daphne told me she was at campaign strategy sessions. Carol had also pulled threads I hadn't even asked her pull, and what she found about the financial angle made my stomach drop in a way the infidelity alone never quite did. But I wasn't ready for all of it that Tuesday. I needed to see Daphne's face first. I set up the projector before she got home. Laptop connected, files queued. Living room rearranged so the blank wall above the fireplace became a screen. I turned off every light in the house except the kitchen. Then I sat down in my chair, poured 2 fingers of bourbon, and waited. She came in at 11:40, heels on the hardwood, keys landing on the entryway table the way they always did. A pause at the hall mirror. I heard her set something down, a bag maybe, and she walked into the living room and stopped. Ben. Her voice was careful, not surprised, not guilty, just careful. The way you sound when you're already running calculations. Long night, I said from the chair. She reached for the lamp switch. Leave it, I told her. She left it. I pressed play. The projector threw a wide rectangle of light onto the wall. The footage was from a week ago Thursday, the restaurant on South Boulevard. The angle was clean. The resolution better than I'd expected. Daphne and Todd at a corner table, a bottle of wine between them. His hand resting over hers on the white tablecloth. Not a handshake, not a colleague's touch. The kind of touch that tells you everything and apologizes for nothing. I let it run for 90 seconds. Daphne hadn't moved. She was standing in the middle of the room with her coat still on, watching herself on the wall like she was seeing a stranger. I clicked to the next file, audio this time. Todd's voice first, low and comfortable. He's too wrapped up in his projects to notice anything. A pause, then Daphne's laugh. A real laugh, the kind I hadn't heard in this house in 2 years. And her voice. I could come home wearing his competitor's logo and he wouldn't look up from his phone. The room went very quiet. She turned to face me slowly. In the dim light from the projector, her expression was somewhere between fear and calculation, which told me more than the footage ever could. "Ben, sit down, Daphne," I said. Not loudly, not with anger in my voice, just the flat, final tone of a man who has already decided what happens next. She sat. I reached over to the side table and picked up a manila envelope, set it on the cushion beside her without looking away from her face. "That's just the beginning," I said. "We have a lot to talk about." She didn't sleep that night. I knew because I didn't either. I took the guest room without discussion, left Daphne sitting at the edge of the couch with the manila envelope in her lap and the projector still throwing pale light on the wall. I didn't slam doors. I didn't give her a speech. I just walked upstairs, closed the door quietly behind me, and lay on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed at 2:14 a.m. Gavin, my 19-year-old, called me from his dorm at UNC Charlotte at 2 o'clock in the morning, which meant he hadn't been sleeping either. I picked up before the second buzz. "Dad." His voice was tight, older sounding than it should have been. "I'm here, son." A long pause. I heard him exhale. The kind of exhale that carries something heavy. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not ask me why." I didn't say it sooner, because I've been asking myself it for 2 years, and I still don't have a good answer. I sat up. "Go ahead." I saw her messages, he said. Mom's, on her iPad. I was helping her reset the Wi-Fi password at Thanksgiving 2 years ago, and her screen was open. I didn't mean to look, but I looked. Another pause. I didn't know what to do with it. "Dad, I was 17. I thought maybe it was nothing." Then I kept telling myself it was nothing because the other option was too. He stopped. "I'm sorry. I should have told you." I sat with that for a moment. My youngest son, 17 years old, carrying a secret like a stone in his chest for 2 years because he didn't know how to hand it to me without destroying something. "Gavin," I said carefully, "this is not your weight to carry. You hear me? Not yours." "I know, but..." "No buts. You were a kid." "You're still a kid." I kept my voice steady, even though something behind my sternum was pulling tight. "I need you to listen to me now. Do you know the name Todd Fielding?" The silence on the other end told me everything. "Yeah," he finally admitted. "That was the name I saw." I closed my eyes. Okay, son. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay at school. You're going to go to your classes tomorrow, and you're not going to call your mother tonight. Can you do that? What are you going to do? Handle it, I said, the right way, without you in the middle of it. He was quiet for a moment, then low and serious. "Dad, he was at our house. He sat at our table." "I know, he's your partner. I know that, too." "How are you not?" He stopped himself. "Because losing my composure doesn't help either of us," I said. "Get some sleep. I'll call you tomorrow." I set the phone down and sat in the dark for a long time. The thing about betrayal that no one warns you about is that it doesn't just hit one target. It radiates. My son had been carrying this since he was 17. My 19-year-old had spent 2 years watching me come home from jobs, watching me write campaign checks, watching me shake Todd Fielding's hand at sidewalk troughs. And he'd known the whole time. That saddened me like broken glass. In the morning, I drove to Carol Dinnan's office before Daphne was awake. Carol was already at her desk when I arrived, coffee in hand, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You've seen the footage," she said. "Now, you need to see the rest." She laid it out across her desk in organized sections. The financial records came first. 3 months of irregular transfers from our joint household account into a secondary account I hadn't known existed. $42,000 moved in increments small enough to avoid automatic flags. Then the campaign finance records. Carol tapped the line near the bottom of a printed page. Fielding's development company contributed $22,000 to your wife's city council campaign, she said flatly, spread across 4 donations for different LLCs. Same registered agent on all 4. I stared at the paper. $22,000. Todd had sat across from me in my own conference room 3 weeks ago, talking about return on investment. She knew. I asked. Carol looked at me over her glasses with an expression that was almost gentle. Mr. Sutton. In my experience, when a man funds a woman's political career while conducting a private relationship with her, both parties generally understand the arrangement. I picked up the paper and read the numbers again. He was feeding her information about our joint venture. 2, wasn't it? It wasn't really a question. Carol nodded anyway. I have documentation of 11 phone calls between Fielding and a family law attorney in the 4 months before you hired me. He wasn't just involved with your wife. He was helping her position herself for the divorce before you knew there was going to be one. I set the paper down, squared the edges against the desk, took one measured breath. I need everything you have, I told her. Every file, every photograph, every call record, organized and ready. Carol pulled a second folder from a drawer and pushed it across the desk. Already done, she said. I had a feeling you'd be here early. Cole found out the wrong way. I hadn't called him yet. That was my mistake. Not because I owed Daphne the courtesy of secrecy, but because my 27-year-old son had his mother's instincts for moving first. By Thursday morning, before I'd had a chance to sit down with him, Daphne had already made her call. I was in my truck outside Carol's office when my phone lit up with Cole's name. I picked up, expecting anger. What I got instead was a wall. I just want you to know, he said, voice flat and clipped, that I talked to Mom this morning. And I think you need to take a serious look at how you've handled this family. I went still. What did she tell you? That you've been building some kind of case against her. That you hired someone to follow her. That you're trying to blow up her campaign because you feel threatened by her success. He paused. Her words, not mine. But honestly, Dad, a PI, that's not who you are. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't fire back. I said, Cole, I need you to hold that thought for 48 hours. Can you do that? I'm not going to, just 48 hours, I repeated. Then I'll show you everything. Every document, every photograph, every financial record. After that, you can have whatever opinion you want. But I'm asking you to wait. He hung up without agreeing. By Friday afternoon, he posted. I saw it through a screenshot Gavin sent me. Cole's public Facebook page. A long paragraph that started with, sometimes the people we think we know best disappoint us the most and wounds us way too a barely veiled portrait of a controlling husband trying to destroy his wife's political career out of wounded pride. He didn't use my name. He didn't need to. Half of Charlotte knew who Daphne Sutton was running against and who she was married to. The post had 412 likes by the time I read it. I sat with that for exactly as long as it took me to finish my coffee. Then I called my attorney, David Prentice, and told him to begin drafting. Then I called a courier service. The package I sent to Cole's apartment in Dilworth contained a single folder. Inside, Carol's surveillance photos. The campaign finance records showing Todd Fielding's 4 LLC contributions totaling $22,000. The bank transfer documentation showing $42,000 moved out of her joint accounts. And a 1-paragraph cover note in my handwriting that said only, I asked for 48 hours. Take as long as you need, Dad. I didn't call him after sending it. I didn't text. I let the document speak. That same afternoon, Carol called me with something new. Fielding's been busy, she said, without preamble. He reached out to Cole through LinkedIn. Sent a connection request with a message attached. Positions himself as a family friend concerned about the situation. Offers to talk. My hand tightened on the phone. My son's LinkedIn. Sir, yesterday evening, before the post went up. So Todd had gone to Cole before the post. He'd helped light the match. I absorbed that, filed it, and kept my voice level. Document it, I told Carol. Everything he sends to anyone in my family gets documented. Already flagged, she replied. There's one more thing. A brief pause. The kind Carol used when she was choosing words. I pulled his personal financials through public records and the business filings on your joint venture. Fielding has been positioning himself to buy out your share of the noted development. He's had 2 preliminary conversations with the other stakeholders. Both happened in the last 6 weeks. The room felt smaller. Todd hadn't just been in my house. He hadn't just been with my wife. He'd been circling my business like a man who'd already decided I was on my way out. Forward everything to Prentice, I said. Done as of 10 minutes ago, Carol answered. This is the moment that tells you exactly who Todd Fielding really is. He didn't just betray his business partner. He went after his partner's son first to make sure Benjamin would have nowhere left to turn after I hung up. I drove to the noted site, parked on the street, and looked at the building we'd been developing together for 18 months. The steel framing, the crane overhead, the crews moving across the upper floors. Something I'd poured time and capital and real thought into. Standing there, indifferent to all of it, I took out my phone and photographed the site from the street. Then I sent one text to Todd Fielding. The first communication I'd initiated with him since I'd learned his name in a different context entirely. We need to meet. Monday, my attorney's office, 9 a.m. He read it within 4 minutes. Didn't reply. That was all right. The reply I needed from him wasn't coming by text. I called Norma on Saturday morning. Daphne's mother lived 20 minutes south of Charlotte, in a brick house she'd kept since her husband passed 8 years ago. She was 71 sharp-eyed, and not a woman who suffered ambiguity well. In all the years I'd known her, she'd never once told me something she didn't mean, and she'd never once pretended a problem wasn't there. I drove down rather than calling. Some conversations don't work through a phone. She opened the door before I reached the porch steps. She'd seen my truck from the front window, the way she always did. She looked at my face, stepped back, and said, "Come in and sit down." We sat at her kitchen table with coffee neither of us touched. I laid out the key documents in front of her. Not everything, just enough. The photographs, the campaign finance records, the financial transfers. Norma didn't speak while she looked through them. She turned each page with the careful deliberateness of someone who wants to make sure they understand before they react. When she reached the last page, she closed the folder, folded her hands on top of it, and looked out the kitchen window for a long moment. "I owe you an apology, Benjamin," she said finally. I waited. "Daphne called me." She turned to face me, and her expression was something I hadn't seen on Norma before. Not quite shame, but close to it. 4 months ago. She didn't tell me all of this, but she told me enough that there was someone, that she was confused, that she didn't know what she wanted. Norma's jaw tightened. I told her to end it and come back to her family. She told me she was trying. I believed her. And I chose not to come to you because I thought... She stopped. I thought it would blow over. I was wrong. "You knew 4 months ago," I said, not accusatory, just establishing the fact. I knew something, not the scope of it. She looked at the folder. "Not this." I picked up the documents and straightened them. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty. Norma, I'm here because I need you to understand what's actually happening, not the version Daphne tells you when she needs your support. The real version." Norma was quiet for a moment. Then, with the directness that I'd always respected in her, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to hold her accountable," I said. "Privately, if she cooperates. Publicly, if she doesn't. but it's going to happen either way. Norma nodded slowly. She didn't argue. She didn't defend her daughter. Not because she didn't love her, but because the documents on the table didn't leave much room for defense. That was the thing about Norma. She loved Daphne completely and saw her clearly, which is a harder combination to maintain than most people realize. She's going to need help, Norma said eventually. Real help. Not the kind that lets her off the hook. The kind that actually fixes something in her. That's up to her, I replied. I drove back to Charlotte with the particular quiet of a man who has said exactly what needed to be said, and nothing more. Norma called Daphne that afternoon. I didn't know what she said, but when I came home that evening, Daphne was sitting at the kitchen table with red eyes and no prepared speech for once. That was new. The package arrived at Cole's apartment on Saturday afternoon. I knew because Carol had used a courier service with delivery confirmation, and the timestamp came through on my phone at 2:47 p.m. I didn't reach out to Cole after that. I gave him the documents and gave him space to do the math himself. He called me Sunday night at 9:38. I was sitting on the back deck of the house. Daphne had taken a staying in the bedroom most of the day, which suited me, and the Charlotte air was cool and still, the kind of quiet that makes a ringing phone feel too loud. Dad. Cole's voice was different than it had been Thursday. The managed flatness was gone. What was there instead was something raw and harder to name. I read everything. Okay, I said. The LinkedIn message from Fielding. He sent that to me Wednesday night before I posted anything. A pause. I thought he was I don't know what I thought. That he was a concerned family friend. I didn't know who he was to Mom. I didn't know any of it. I know you didn't. I put that post up, Dad. I basically called you a controlling... He's stopped. I need to take it down. That's your call, I said, not mine. I'm going to take it down, and I want to see you tonight if you're okay with it. I told him to come over. He arrived 40 minutes later, and we sat in the driveway in my truck because neither of us wanted to go inside the house. The engine off, the windows fogging slightly in the October chill. Cole is built like me, broad through the shoulders. Not someone who looks comfortable being still, but he sat very still that night. He contacted you to get ahead of me, I said, before you could hear my side. That's who Todd Fielding is. Cole stared through the windshield. He was in our house. Dad. He came to your company Christmas party 2 years ago, and you introduced him to us. His voice was tight, and the whole time I confirmed. We sat without speaking for a while. Then, Cole turned to look at me. What are you going to do about the business, the Noda project? Princess is handling the legal dissolution of the partnership. Fielding's been trying to position himself to buy out my share, so we're making sure that doesn't happen on his terms. I kept my voice steady. He's going to find that the documentation Carol pulled makes his position a lot more complicated than he planned. Cole processed that. And Mom, she's going to face what she did, I said, quietly and completely, or loudly and completely. Her choice. He nodded slowly. Then he reached over and put his hand on my shoulder briefly, the way men in this family said things they didn't have words for, and got out of the truck. I watched him drive away and sat in the driveway alone for another 10 minutes, breathing in the cold air through the cracked window, letting the night settle around me. Todd Fielding had tried to use my son as a weapon. He'd slid into Cole's inbox and planted a story before I could plant the truth. It hadn't worked, but the attempt alone told me everything I needed to know about what kind of man I'd been in business with. On Monday morning, I was in David Prentice's office at 8:45, 15 minutes before Todd Fielding was supposed to arrive. He didn't come at 9 o'clock. He mostly'd come at 9:30. At 9:52, his attorney called Prentice's office and informed us that Mr. Fielding would be communicating through counsel going forward. Prentice leaned back in his chair with a small, satisfied expression of a man who'd expected exactly this. He blinked, he said.
He did, I agreed.
Now, let's make sure blinking cost him. Gavin drove up from UNC Charlotte on a Thursday, 2 weeks into the unraveling. He hadn't asked permission. He'd texted me at noon. "Coming home tonight, don't argue," and arrived at 7 o'clock with a duffel bag and the focused expression of a young man who had decided something. He was 19, lean, still a little unfinished looking in the way of young men who haven't quite grown into their own frames yet. He walked into the kitchen, set his bag down, looked at his mother standing at the counter, and said, without preamble, "I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish." Daphne set down her mug. Her eyes moved from Gavin to me and back again. "Okay," she said carefully. "I've known for 2 years," Gavin said. "I saw the messages on your iPad when I was helping you with the Wi-Fi at Thanksgiving. I've known his name. I've known what was happening. And I've spent 2 years sitting across from you at this table pretending I didn't." His jaw was tight, but his voice stayed controlled. "I was 17. I didn't know what to do. But I know what I did do. I watched Dad come home from 12-hour days and take you to campaign dinners and shake that man's hand and never once say a word. And that's on me. I have to live with that." Daphne's face had gone pale. "Gavin, I'm not done." He held up a hand, a gesture so like mine that it stopped me for a second. "I'm not saying this to hurt you. I'm saying it because you've been telling people a story where Dad is the problem. And that story is wrong. He was never the problem. He was the one holding everything together while you were somewhere else." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a car passed on the street. Daphne pressed her fingers to her mouth. Her eyes were glassy, and I could see her fighting for composure the way she always did. Jaw set, shoulders back. The performance of someone who doesn't crack in public, even when she's fracturing underneath. "Gavin," she said finally, her voice thin. "I know I hurt your father. I know I hurt this family. I'm not asking for an explanation." He cut in quietly. "I'm asking you to stop making Dad out to be the villain in what you did. That's all." He pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table, squaring himself like the conversation was over and he intended to eat dinner. I caught his eye across the room. He gave me a small nod, composed, deliberate, and reached for the fruit bowl like none of this had cost him anything. It had cost him a great deal. I knew that. But he wasn't going to let her see it. And I understood that impulse completely. Daphne left the kitchen without speaking. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, slow and heavy. Then Gavin looked at me again, and the composure slipped just slightly, enough for me to see the 19-year-old underneath. "Was that okay?" he asked quietly. "That was more than okay," I told him. He nodded and looked down at the table. I put a hand on his shoulder, the same way Cole had done to me in the driveway. And for a moment, neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. The therapist's name was Dr. Miriam Oakes. She worked out of a suite in South Park, had a waiting room with soft lighting and small watercolor prints, and had been seeing Daphne every other Tuesday for 14 months. I knew her name because Daphne had mentioned her twice. Once when she said therapy was helping her process some things, and once when she said doctor. Oakes had encouraged her to honor her own needs. At the time, I'd thought nothing of either statement. Now, I understood them differently. I didn't show up at Dr. Oakes's office. I didn't call her either. What I did was mail her a sealed envelope containing a single letter and a thumb drive. The letter explained who I was and what the drive contained. Not the surveillance footage, not the financial records, but the secondary folder Carol had flagged during our last meeting. Patterns, timelines. The documented shape of a life lived in deliberate concealment. I wasn't asking Dr. Oakes to break privilege. I was asking her to understand what she was actually treating. Her response arrived 4 days later. Not a phone call, not a letter. A formal notice from her practice's legal representative advising me that any further contact would be considered harassment, and that she reserved the right to file a complaint with the state licensing board. I read it once, sat on my desk, and called David Prentice. "She's protecting her client," Prentice said. "She's protecting her billing cycle," I replied. "Forward the response to the state board along with the documentation. Let them decide whether a therapist who encourages a patient to honor her needs while that patient is defrauding her spouse and running illegal campaign finance routes deserves to keep her license." Prentice was quiet for a moment. "You understand this will get back to Daphne immediately." "That's the point," I said. It got back to Daphne that same evening. She came downstairs while I was reviewing site plans at the kitchen table and stood in the doorway with her arms crossed and her expression stripped of the careful composure she'd been maintaining for 2 weeks. "You filed a complaint against Miriam," she said. I forwarded documentation to the licensing board. I replied without looking up. "There's a difference. She's my therapist." "Ben, that's a protected relationship." I set down my pen and looked at her directly. "She spent 14 months helping you rationalize a double life. I didn't violate anything. I informed the appropriate authority and let them make a determination. If she's done nothing wrong, nothing will come of it." I leaned back in my chair. But I think we both know that's not quite how it went. Daphne's jaw tightened. She shifted her weight. The tell she'd always had when she was recalculating. "You're trying to dismantle everything around me. I'm trying to make sure the truth has room to exist," I said evenly. "You've been very good at preventing that." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she pulled out the chair across from mine and sat. Not aggressively, not performing, just sat the way a person does when they've run out of angles and know it. "He called me again," she said. I waited. "Todd, 3 times this week from numbers I didn't recognize. He wants to talk. He says the situation has gotten out of hand and he thinks we should coordinate." She pressed her lips together. I didn't answer. "Good," I said. "Don't. He's scared. He should be." I folded my hands on the table. Prentice has everything he needs to make the noted dissolution very uncomfortable for Todd. The campaign finance documentation is already with the city ethics board. Whatever he thinks coordinating with you is going to fix, it's too late for that. Daphne absorbed this. She looked down at the table. Then, in a voice that was quieter than anything she'd used in the past 3 weeks, "I had a date last night." She said it almost absently, as if she'd forgotten for a moment where she was. "He took me to dinner at the Capitol Grill." I sat there, and all I could think about was... She stopped. Something in my expression had changed, and she'd caught it. I looked at her steadily and said, "I know." Carol's team was in the parking garage. The color left her face. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move. I just let that single line settle in the space between us like a stone dropped in the still water. She opened her mouth and closed it again. Her hands, which had been resting loosely on the table, pulled back slowly toward her. "You were still seeing him," I said, "even now, even knowing everything that's documented, everything that's in motion." I kept my voice flat and factual. "That tells me what I needed to know. Daphne, it tells me this was never confusion. It was never a mistake that got out of hand. It was a choice, every single day. A choice." She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was almost inaudible. "I don't know how to stop." "That," I said, standing up and gathering my plans from the table, "is exactly why you need real help. Not the kind that tells you to honor your needs, the kind that tells you the truth." I picked up my papers. "I'll be in the study. Prentice needs my signature on 3 documents tomorrow morning. I'd suggest you spend tonight thinking about what you're going to say to the City Council Ethics Board when they call. Because they will call." I walked out of the kitchen and didn't look back. Behind me, the house was very quiet. Not the quiet of peace. The quiet of things finally irrevocably out in the open. The Charlotte City Council Ethics Board sent Daphne a formal notice of inquiry on a Thursday. I knew before she did. Prentice had a contact in the city clerk's office, and I made sure I was home when a letter arrived. She opened it at the kitchen counter. I watched her read it from across the room. She read it twice, then set it flat on the counter with both hands pressed on top of it, like she was keeping it from flying away. They want a written response within 15 business days, she said. I know. She turned to look at me. Did you do this? I submitted documentation, I said. What the board does with it is up to them. Her campaign manager called her that afternoon. I could hear half the conversation from the hallway. She'd retreated to the bedroom, but the door wasn't fully shut. Words like optics and timeline, and we need to get ahead of this, floated through the gap. When she came back downstairs an hour later, she looked like someone who'd aged a decade since morning. Alan Fan is stepping down as my campaign manager, she said. His name wasn't one I'd flagged, a local political operative I'd met twice, and not someone I had any issue with. He says he can't manage the liability. That's his call, I said. Without him, the campaign is effectively over. She sat down heavily at the table. You know that. The campaign was effectively over the moment Todd Fielding's LLC contributions became part of an ethics inquiry, I replied. I didn't make that happen. The paper trail made that happen. She pressed her fingers against her forehead. I worked 3 years for this. I know you did. I kept my voice measured, and I supported every single day of it. Drove to events, wrote checks, stood next to you at fundraisers, and believed what I told people about you. I paused. That's what makes this particular conversation so instructive. Gavin came downstairs mid-afternoon, took one look at the atmosphere in the kitchen, and set his jaw. He'd extended his visit by 3 days without being asked. He poured himself a glass of water, leaned against the counter, and looked at his mother. What happens with the campaign? He asked her directly. Daphne glanced at him. It's being suspended. Gavin nodded once. No reaction beyond that, just a contained acknowledgement of someone who'd already run the scenarios. And Todd? He asked. That's a separate matter, I answered. Prentice is handling the partnership dissolution. Fielding's attorneys have been very interested in avoiding a full financial audit of the Novato project's books. We're going to give them the opportunity to cooperate, which will determine how much of that audit becomes public record. Gavin looked at me. He's going to try to make a deal. He's already trying, I said. The question is whether what he's offering is worth anything. That evening, Cole drove down from Dilworth. He and Gavin and I sat on the back deck after dinner while Daphne stayed inside. The temperature had dropped into the low 50s, and I brought out a fleece, which I didn't need, but held on to anyway. My 2 sons flanked me in the patio chairs. Cole on the left, big and quiet. Gavin on the right, watchful. We didn't talk about their mother. We talked about the Novato project, about Gavin's midterms, about Cole's firm. Ordinary things. The kind of conversation you have when you're reminding yourself that life is larger than the crisis inside it. At one point, Cole said, without looking at me, "You know what I keep thinking about? You called me and asked for 48 hours. Just that. You didn't argue. You didn't defend yourself. You just asked for the time to show me the truth." He shook his head slightly. I should have given you that automatically. That's on me. You were working with the information you had, I said. I was working with what Mom handed me, he corrected. Different thing. I didn't argue with that. He was right. And letting him be right without softening it was the honest thing to do. When they left that night, I stood on the front porch and watched their taillights disappear down the street. The neighborhood was settled into its quiet nighttime rhythm. A dog barking 2 houses down, the distant sound of trains somewhere past the tree line. I stood there for a while before going back inside. The house still held the shape of everything that happened in it, but it was beginning slowly to feel like mine again. 3 weeks after the first post, Cole put up another one. I didn't know it was coming. He didn't tell me, didn't ask my opinion, didn't run it past anyone, as far as I could tell. I found out because Gavin texted me a screenshot at 7:40 in the morning with a single word. Dad. It was short. Cole had never been a man of excess words, and the post reflected that. It said, "A few weeks ago, I made a public statement based on incomplete information. I was wrong to do that. And I was wrong not to ask harder questions before I did. My father is one of the most principled men I know. I don't say that because he's my father. I say it because the evidence, once I actually looked at it, made it impossible to say anything else. I owe him better than what I gave him, and I intend to spend some time making that right." No hashtags, no mention of his mother, no dramatics, just a clean, public correction from a man who'd made a mistake and owned it without dressing it up. By noon, it had more engagement than the original post. I called him that afternoon. He picked up on the second ring and said, before I could speak, "Don't make it weird, Dad." "I wasn't going to," I said. "Good." A pause. Fielding messaged me again, by the way. Different account this time. He's looking for someone who will listen. "What did you do with it?" "Forwarded it to Prentice," Cole said. "Figured that's what you'd want." It was exactly what I'd want. I told him so and let the conversation move on to other things, the way the best conversations do when the hard part is behind them and you both know it. Todd Fielding's attempt to negotiate a quiet dissolution of our partnership ended on a Wednesday morning in Prentice's conference room. Todd arrived with his attorney, a man named Gary Fisk, who had the harried look of someone who'd been handed a complicated file at short notice, and spent 40 minutes trying to characterize the Nota joint venture as a straightforward business arrangement with no connection to anything personal. Prentice listened with the patience of a man who'd heard every version of this speech, and when Todd's attorney finished, Prentice opened his folder and laid out the documented sequence of events. The financial positioning, the preliminary conversations with the other stakeholders, the campaign contributions routed through 4 LLCs, and Carol's records of 11 communications between Fielding and a family law attorney in the 4 months before I'd hired her. Fisk asked for a recess. When they came back, the offer on the table was a full buyout at assessed value, plus a signed non-disclosure agreement. I declined the NDA. "My client will accept the buyout at assessed value," Prentice said, "with a comprehensive accounting of all project finances over the life of the partnership. The non-disclosure is not on the table." Fielding looked at me across the conference table for the first time since the meeting had started. He had the expression of a man who'd been certain until very recently that he was the smartest person in the room. I looked back at him without expression and said nothing. They signed the accounting agreement 2 days later. Norma called me on a Sunday afternoon. I was driving back from a site visit in Nota. They often habit more than necessity at this point, and her name on the dashboard gave me a moment's pause before I answered. "I talked to Daphne," she said, "properly this time, not managing her, not softening anything. I told her exactly what I thought of what she'd done, and exactly what I expected of her going forward." A breath. She cried. Real crying, not the performance kind. "You can tell the difference when you know your child well enough." "I know you can," I said. "She's going to get real help." Norma continued. "I'm making sure of it. Not Dr. Oakes. Someone who won't just tell her what she wants to hear." A pause. "I'm not asking you to do anything with that information, Benjamin. I just thought you should know she's not going to slide out of this. Thank you, Norma." I said, and I meant it. After I hung up, I sat in the truck for a few minutes outside the notice site. The building was moving along without the disruption of the partnership dispute. The other stakeholders have been professional, and Prentice had handled the transition cleanly. Looking at it now, at the steel and glass taking shape against a Charlotte skyline, I thought about how much of what we build in partnership with people we haven't yet fully understood. That was true of buildings. It was true of marriages. The difference was that a building, once the foundation was right, would stand on its own. I put the truck in gear and drove home to start clearing it out. I sold the house in November. Not because I couldn't afford to keep it. The settlement was fair and the business was solid. I sold it because every room in that house had been a stage for something that wasn't real. And I didn't want to spend another winter walking through it. I found a place on Morningside Drive, a smaller house with better bones, a backyard that backed up to a stand of old oaks, and no history I hadn't chosen myself. Cole and Gavin helped me move on a Saturday. We rented a truck, loaded it with the things I'd selected. No furniture that had been ours, no artwork she'd picked, no accumulated weight of a life I was deliberately setting down, and drove it across town in 2 trips. By evening, the new house held just enough to live in and nothing that didn't belong. We ordered pizza and sat on the floor of the empty living room because the couch wasn't coming until Monday. Gavin complained about the lack of seating with a deadpan energy of a 19-year-old who thinks discomfort is funnier than it is. Cole ate 2 slices without sitting down, walking the perimeter of the room like he was measuring it for something. I watched them both and felt, for the first time in a long time, something close to uncomplicated contentment. Daphne had entered a structured therapy program in late October. Norma had made good on her word, found someone with a different philosophy than Dr. Oakes, and stayed involved enough to make sure Daphne didn't talk herself out of it. I didn't have opinions about her recovery. That was her territory now. We communicated through attorneys on the practical matters and didn't speak directly, which suited us both. The ethics board inquiry concluded in December. The Registry of Election Finance in North Carolina issued a formal finding of campaign finance violations. The 4 LLC donations were ruled improperly disclosed, and Todd Fielding's company was assessed a significant civil penalty. The finding was public record. It ran in the Charlotte Observer on a Tuesday morning, 3 paragraphs below the fold. I read it with my coffee and moved on. Carol didn't send me a brief email the same day. Saw the Observer piece, thought you should know. The licensing board review of Dr. Oakes has been concluded. She received a formal letter of reprimand and will be required to complete additional ethics training. Not a revocation, but not nothing. Then, in a separate line, "You handled this well." I replied with 2 words. "Thank you, Carol." The new house had a porch that faced west. On clear evenings, the light came through the oaks at a low angle and painted the yard in long, warm stripes. I'd taken to sitting out there after work with coffee, or sometimes nothing, just the air and the trees, and the particular silence of a place that was genuinely mine. One evening in late November, about 3 weeks after the move, Gavin called. He was back at UNC Charlotte, midterms behind him, sounding lighter than he had in months. "How's the new place?" he asked. "Good," I said. "Quiet." Good quiet or empty quiet? I thought about that for a moment, watching the light move in the oaks. Good quiet, I decided. Definitely good quiet. He seemed satisfied with that. We talked for 20 minutes about things that had nothing to do with any of it. His classes, a basketball game he'd gone to, a road trip planning with 2 friends over winter break. Easy conversation. The kind you can only have when the hard conversation is genuinely finished. After we hung up, I sat on the porch until the light was gone and the yard went dark except for the glow of the neighbors' windows through the trees. The night was cold and clean, and I didn't go inside right away because there was no reason to hurry. I had a house that was mine, 2 sons who knew exactly who their father was, and a life that was no longer built on someone else's terms. That was a foundation worth building on. Benjamin never once lost his composure. No threats, no outbursts, just the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was worth. In the end, the truth didn't need his anger. It just needed him to stay standing.
Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.